Phillies lose 3 out of 4. Frank, you could have made 3 pages worth of Frank's Phillies mailbag this week. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Yeah, it's never ordinary when Philly sports teams lose. And the Phillies mailbag was flooded with questions for Frank. So let's dive in to some of the mailbag questions with Frank Klose from 97.3 ESPN.com. What's up there, Frank?
Not much, Mike. How you doing?
All is good. Did you notice the volume of questions after a couple losses seemed to be, the tone changed a little bit?
It sure did. You'd think the sky was completely falling and the Phillies have the worst roster in the history of baseball, but no. I will say, the nice thing is, if you're a Phillies fan, a lot of the questions were really about the outer edges of the roster and not so much about the core of the roster. So that's usually a good sign that the team is doing pretty well.
Right, and there was some questions regarding a player from off the roster, one that got hurt down in Atlanta. So let's start off with that. How much does that injury, Ronald Acuna Jr., ACL, out for the year, factor into Dave Dombrowski's aggressiveness at the deadline? Do you think that changes his outlook or intensifies their 6 games up? Do they look at Atlanta as a team that's not as big of a competitor right now, or do they think it's time to put the foot down?
Well, first, I want to acknowledge what a blow to not just the Braves, but all of Major League Baseball to lose Ronald Acuna Jr. That's his second ACL tear. His first one happened back in 2021. He tore the other ACL in the other knee. And they've also lost Spencer Strider, their ace pitcher, a really young-looking ace pitcher that they have. And so, that's not good for baseball. In fact, if you're a Phillies fan, you probably want to see them have some really good competition with some of those players. Now, I will say this, the Braves still have a ton of talent left. They should not be counted out. But what does that mean for the trade deadline? I think that's a little bit of a different type of question here. I think the Braves still remain a threat, but I think if you're Dave Dombrowski in your role as president of baseball operations, I think the sense of urgency might be not so much that, but just so much that the Phillies kind of fell short last year more than the year before. And they're kind of in that window where they've got a lot of these players in their prime. And I think that he's going to be looking for any opportunity to supplement that core of Phillies talent and get them to not just the playoffs, but to the World Series and win the World Series this time, right? So if you're just looking with them in relation to the Braves, I don't think he's looking at that situation and trying to match it 1-for-1. But I think what he will do is just look at his roster and say, all right, what can I do to improve this team with what's available on that trade market out there? And we don't really know what that is just yet because a lot of teams are still in it right now. As something you've said, Mike, the last few weeks, there's a lot of teams kind of hanging around or in and around that 500 mark and haven't really given themselves some distance to other teams in their division. So it's really unclear what's unavailable. But I will add this to the conversation, though, Mike. The Phillies find themselves now with 5 of the top 100 prospects, according to MLB Pipeline. Shortstop Starlin Caba just joined the rest of the names that we already knew, Andrew Painter, Mick Abel, Justin Crawford, and Aiden Miller, just this week because one of the prospects that was on the list got promoted. He was the next man up. But that's a nice thing to have if you're the Phillies, to have 5 prospects in that top 100. You probably don't want to trade them all, but it's a good sign that this farm system, which was really lacking when Dave Dombrowski took over, is becoming a little bit more replenished, and he can use perhaps some of the assets to make the Phillies a better team heading into the trade deadline. But it won't be about winning the NL East. It'll be about winning the World Series.
Yeah, I know, the question was regarding Ronald Acuna and his factor. Keep in mind, Frank, they won the World Series a couple of years ago when Ronald Acuna and others were injured. So don't expect the Braves to keep, sit on their hands here either.
No, they absolutely will not. They'll still be a good team. And you know what happened last time? And the Brave players said this this year as well. That they're going to try to win it for him. Maybe that's a little extra boost. Maybe one. This was a town where we've seen how next man up can win a championship, right? I mean, I think they're going to take that approach down there in Atlanta and say, all right, well, it's on me now to do a little bit more because we're down our top guy on the offense. So I think the Braves are still going to be very much involved in this race. It's an immediate blow to them, but I think they have their eyes on something bigger, and they still have a lot of talent.
More questions coming in about trade stuff. Chris and Andrew, do we go after an outfielder like Jazz Chisholm? He says he's almost out of patience with the Rojas, Pache, Merrifield triangle of right-handed bats out there. And then Andrew throws in, what's more important, adding an outfielder or that righty reliever at the deadline? So there's a lot of layers to this, two-part question from two different readers.
Yeah, we're still more than 2 months away from this season's trade deadline. That's going to be July 30th this year. That's what the baseball executives have agreed to. But, I think there's the possibility Phillies could add an outfielder. They could add a reliever. They might be the places where they go. But first, I want to acknowledge the Jazz Chisholm idea. I'm not sure if he's the right fit for the Phillies, because if you bring in a guy like Jazz Chisholm, you're making a very long-term commitment in that outfield. He's not going to be a free agent until 2027. Do they need that commitment? Not just so much in clearing a space for him, but they're going to have to give up a lot to get somebody like Chisholm. So, when you compare someone who's going to be a long-term asset versus somebody that might be a trade deadline acquisition that might be there for the rest of the year, it'll cost you a lot more for somebody like Chisholm. And that's going to be problematic, because I think both Brandon Marsh and Yohan Rojas are not players that you're ready to give up on yet. I know he meant the one question mentioned Rojas as somebody he was, quote, tired of, I think. But I think there's still a lot of promise there. I think the story is still being written as to what Yohan Rojas is going to be in the major leagues. And I think Brandon Marsh is a player you want playing most of the time. He's not hitting lefties that great, so that's usually his day off. But he's been a very valuable piece to this Phillies team. And, say what you want about Nick Castellanos, he's still signed for 2 more years after this one. So they've got a pretty full outfield at the moment. So would they add somebody that maybe could take over center field for the year and then turn it over to Rojas again? Maybe. That could, a lot could depend on the health of Trey Turner. Even though Turner's not an outfield, the rest of the roster and how it plays out could be in relation to what they have going on at shortstop. And Trey Turner had a minor setback. He said he felt some soreness in that hamstring. So after taking some batting practice last week. So we're kind of seeing how that's going to play out. But I'm not sure that Chisholm is the guy that you want to go to. I think they could add somebody. But again, there's still 2 months left, and we're going to see what these guys can do the rest of the way until that time. And that might make their needs a little bit clearer. And in fact, the relievers, I would say exactly the same thing. If you look up and down the Phillies bullpen, they've got a lot of really strong performances this year out of that bullpen. Now, the 2 names that have struggled would be Seranthony Dominguez and Gregory Soto. And, Phillies fans have seen when Seranthony Dominguez has been electric. He was the reason they got to the World Series along with Jose Alvarado with that back end of that bullpen. Could he regain some of this control that he seems to have lost? I think that's something you want to look at the next couple months. And Gregory Soto, when the Phillies traded for him, he was coming off of an all-star season with the Detroit Tigers. Yeah, it was the Tigers, but he was an all-star closer. And I
like that caveat. Yeah, it was the Tigers.
Whip, Mike.
Yeah.
What's that?
I like that caveat. Yeah, it was the Tigers.
Yeah, well, it's true. He might not have made the all-star team on a team with perhaps a little bit more talent on it at the time, but he was an all-star closer. So, I think you need to see a little bit more out of him. These are 2 arms that have demonstrated that they can pitch in the back ends of bullpens in the major leagues. Neither of them really getting the job done just yet. And, last week we were talking about the idea of Mason Miller from the Oakland Athletics. We're not really sure if he's available in a trade yet. He's been dominant completely so far. That's one of those big time prospects that you pay a lot for, much like Chisholm, because there's many years of control left. But I think at the end of the day, the Phillies will be shopping in both categories. A lot depends on who's available, and I think Dave Dombrowski is the type that if he thinks he's going to make the roster better at the end of the day, he's going to do something. So I see him being pretty active when it comes to July 30th, but. I think it's a little early to close the book on some of those names that were mentioned.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with the trade deadline. I think he's going to sit on his hands for a little bit, give some more guys, get some more intel on guys like Merrifield, Rojas, Pache. But you got to wonder with that whole triangle there. You mentioned Marsh too. Obviously, it seems like Marsh is not going to hit against lefties, but they don't really have a great right-handed option at this point. I also wonder how long of the leash is for Castellanos. What if he's hitting 190, 210 between now and July 4th? I mean, at what point do you possibly have to try to find maybe a left-handed complement? I say that being on the nice side. He ain't hitting lefties or righties at this point, but maybe you just tell him to concentrate on hitting left-handed pitching where he's hitting like 202 as opposed to 196. Is that something that you think it will get to?
Well, obviously it can't perform like this forever, but one thing I don't understand totally about Castellanos is they've yet to really give him a day off. You think that if someone's struggling, you want to try to let him watch a little bit, get his legs back under him again, and hopefully work on the swing a little bit on that day off. But he's always been a streaky player. I think they're holding out to see if he goes on a stronger streak. But I mean that's a pretty significant player that you made a significant commitment to just sort of put aside. Now, if you get to the trade deadline and they do happen to be able to pick up somebody that would be a helpful piece, maybe he'll play less. But I think the fact that the Phillies are winning kind of takes away that sense of urgency to do something, and you kind of fall back on the idea that Castellanos is a streaky player, and eventually he's going to go on that hot streak that you saw last year at the beginning of the season, and the year before that it took till later in the year to see. But he's been around this game a while. He's got a strong track record. So a lot of these players, Whit Merrifield, who you mentioned too, not hitting yet this year. Both these guys have track records, so I think they're not in a hurry to sit either one of them, because it's not like the Phillies are in a situation where they're completely desperate for a win and they need to try something. So as long as they're mostly winning, I would expect to see those players playing a lot, and hopefully for the Phillies' sake, they get their swings back. So, but I wouldn't be quick to sit Castellanos down. I would think that something's going to happen at some point, and he's going to go on a streak, given his history.
A lot of questions regarding Taijuan Walker as to why is he still in the rotation, why is he still pitching here. The Walker thing, I don't know. What is your view? People say, why was he still pitching yesterday? I mean, 6 innings, gave up 9 hits. He was obviously getting hit around. That's kind of been the story of his season. They seemingly keep him out there almost like, I look at it like, look, we're paying you all this money. You're not pitching 3 innings. Like, you're going to go 6, whether you like it or not, or whether you're pitching well or not. We're not going to tax the bullpen every time you pitch. We know you can get 6, and quite frankly, they're just leaving him out there like, hey, take one for the team today because we're paying you a lot of money. How do you read the Walker, the way they're using him?
Well, it's still just 6 starts into his season. So, he started out injured. Yeah, this hasn't been his best season. I mean, what his ERA is at 8.53 at this point. So what I think the Phillies would like to do is kind of the same thing that we were just saying with the offense. Someone with a track record, veteran player. They're also paying him a lot of money. Got to see what he's got. And, I think Spencer Turnbull, as good as he is, I think they would be happy to give him a shot again. I don't think they're keeping him from having a shot, but, he could have his day later. It's still pretty early. Now, last year you saw what they did with Walker in the playoffs when they thought, the season was on the line. They didn't really use him. Certainly in the playoffs, they opted not to use him. So down the stretch, I think they'll make those decisions, but in a 162 game season, you got to think of the bigger picture. Taking one for the team, as you said, or pitching into the game a little bit deeper. That's really helpful when you have a bullpen that's you want to keep rested, and a rested bullpen is usually an effective bullpen. So I would think the Phillies would approach it similarly. They're going to give him his whole handful of starts. 2 months from now, might there be a different discussion? Excuse me, I read his ERA wrong. 5.5. I'm sorry, 4.78 in May. It was what 8.53 just in that April start. But I think he's going to pitch through this. I think he's going to hopefully, for the Phillies' sake, kind of settle in. But they've got some time. Again, they have a 6-game league in the National League East, and there's really no sense of urgency to get him off the mound. And they can give him 6 innings at least. That's not killing the bullpen the next day. And these days, that's half the battle with the starter.
Yeah. One of the questions too. Another person says why Walker was a point of contention by many of the people in the asking questions this week. But He said, if I was Dombrowski, I would just admit my mistake and eat the money. Is that something that's a possibility?
Not yet. When you think back to other bad pitching contracts, when the Phillies cut ties with Adam Eaton in 2008, it was kind of like they said they weren't going to pitch him. They got him to go to the minor leagues, and then it took till 2009, which was the last year of his deal, to just cut ties. I think as long as they still have a couple of years left, which they do, you're going to see if we can give you something. If you get to the end of year 3, and then maybe some of the Phillies young starters are ready, the Abels and Painters of the world, and there's just not a spot in the rotation, they might think differently. But I think that it's probably a little too early for that. And given he's coming off an injury, I think there's room for a little bit of slack there. And let's not forget too, the first half of last year when the likes of Nola and Wheeler got off to a slow start, he was really darn good. And his struggles last year were really limited to the first inning, and when he didn't give up a lot in the first inning, he was pretty good. So I think that they hope they can get that Taijuan Walker back a little bit, and yeah, they made a substantial investment in Walker, 4-year deal. I think it was a $76 million, $78 million. I forget the exact number off the top of my head, but it was substantial, and I think they're not going to eat it yet. Might they before year 4 if next year goes really poorly? Maybe.
All right, Frank, I thought I lost you for a second there. I thought you froze up on me. All right, let's get another question in here regarding – you mentioned the prospect list, that they have 5 in the top 100, but maybe the guy getting the most attention is Aiden Miller. He's all the way down at Clearwater, but can we drive right up the road to Lakewood to see him soon? Tell us a little bit about that and more about the player himself.
Well, I think he's getting the most attention of all the Phillies prospects lately. We see a lot of regular updates.
Was he one of the top? Was he one of those 5 in the top 100?
He most certainly is. So he is the one that gets the most attention, I think, in these Phillies broadcasts. And the reason why, he's off to a really good start for the Threshers. He's hitting .313. He's got a .950 OPS, 4 home runs, 21 runs batted in, and that's pretty good for somebody who was just drafted the year before. Now, I think one thing that we have to get straight is that the minor leagues have been reconfigured, and this is really the lowest level of full play professional ball, just above what they now call the Florida Complex League, which used to be the Gulf Coast League rookie ball. So he's really at the lowest level right now, and but I will say I don't think he was so dominant so far this season that you're in a hurry to move him up to Class A, what they call Jersey Shore now, up in Lakewood. I think that there's still some room to look at what he's doing. I think one thing that's really important that we haven't really talked about yet is that they drafted him to be a third baseman. A lot of his travel ball, a lot of the leagues he was playing in as a high school senior, he played third base. So he was drafted as a third baseman, but when he signed, he said, "Hey, look, I just didn't play shortstop because a lot of the other players that I played with played shortstop." And so he really asked if he could get a crack at shortstop, and the Phillies had told him at the time, like, okay, well, maybe we'll split your time between shortstop and third base. And so far, he's just played shortstop. So I think that's another thing, too, you want to look at here is, might he have a shot at sticking at the shortstop position? Certainly a good bat at the shortstop position is a pretty valuable commodity, right? If you think back over the years, the likes of the Jeters and Ripkins and Rodriguez's before he moved to third base, that's a premium position to have some offense. Trey Turner, certainly one of them right now. But with all that going on, I don't think he's going to jump up a level any sooner than after the 2024 draft and a little bit after that. Now, the 2024 draft is scheduled for July 14th through 16th. And what will usually happen in the wake of that is players sign. Some of them will go to that complex league, the rookie ball, and then that will bump some of the guys in rookie ball up to the Threshers, which will then bump some players up to Jersey Shore. So if he's playing well, if he looks like that he's shown them everything that he wants to show them at shortstop, and they don't want to give him some time at third base too, still before the next move. Maybe he'll be one of those players bumped up, but I don't see that happening till later. Again, after the draft, after some time for players to sign, and we start to see the organization bump up a little bit. After that July draft, I would say typically it's only been a few years since they reconfigured the minor leagues and they made the draft later. But so far, that's when you start to see a lot of the organizational moves, and maybe some players get cut around there because then all of a sudden you've got this infusion of players into your organization. So I don't think it'll be anytime soon. Maybe by the end of the year, though, you'll see Miller up in New Jersey.
Yeah, well, that would be fun, and it's fun to hear about these prospects. But as we know, the Phillies have been an organization in the past, especially during their big run where they had top prospects. None of them, essentially, that I can recall anyway, maybe I'm wrong, have panned out. Dominic Brown was the number one prospect in baseball. He did make an all-star game, but kind of flamed out. J.P. Crawford, I think, was the number one prospect. He's been okay. Not like a star player, but he's been a solid starter. You had a ton of players like, Jason Donald and Lou Marson and Carlos Carrasco and, a ton of players in that, like, 07, to 11 range. I don't know that any of them really – they've had some prospects, none of which have really panned out for them.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. They're just prospects. And, there's Casey Stern, you might know his name, who's done a lot of media. He has a nice saying. He said, prospects are cool, parades are cooler. So, yeah. There's a lot you can do to convert those prospects to talent on your major league roster as well. So, they can help you two different ways. But, yeah, a lot of it is waiting it out and seeing. Now, the Phillies used their number one picks on Bryson Stott and Alec Boehm. In successive years, Boehm first, then Stott, and both of them have come up.
They've worked out,
and
yes.
Really worked out. I think that's fair to say.
I guess the one guy is Abel. He's one of their top prospects. Is he the guy that they can part with to try to get something here? There's a role for him, and has he even been good enough to get a role? And if somebody else is saying, look, we like him a lot, you've got Wheeler here, you got Nola here, you're going to have Suarez here. You probably think you have a spot for Painter. You still have Walker signed for 2 more years. You're almost wondering, I don't know what Sanchez's contract is either, but where does Abel even fit in? So is that the guy that can get them something to help this team out?
Possibly. He hasn't been that great this year so far. Right now he's 1-4 with a 6.21 ERA in his 8 starts at AAA Lehigh Valley. So he might need some more seasoning. Might they part with him? I don't think he's an untouchable prospect. I think they would like to have him and see what he does. Ranger Suarez would be one that's going to be a free agent in a couple of years. So, you want to have some arms that could potentially, from your organization, replace some of these spots in the rotation. Or, as we were just saying, if Walker doesn't really pan out by the end of next year, you need somebody ready to take the ball. So, I don't think he's an untouchable, but at the same time, or based on how he's pitched this year, our organization is going to be lining up to trade for him. Maybe not. I mean, you don't want to trade somebody when his value might be down. But again, scouts don't just look at the numbers; they see his mechanics, and they could still like him. But another name that you might want to look at too is that Justin Crawford. He would be somebody who potentially could help the Phillies down the line, but he might make a really nice trade piece for somebody. So I don't think Crawford is untouchable. Again, he's somebody that I think they'd like to keep around, but I guess it depends on the type of deal you're making. Because I will say this at the trade deadline the last few years, just really around baseball, not a lot of teams' top upper echelon prospects get moved these days. It seems like people are really eager to have an infusion of young talent that doesn't cost you a lot of money, so you don't have to sign free agents all the time, and that's how you kind of balance out your roster. Having the Marshes and the Stotts and the Boehms that helps you keep the Harpers and Turners and Schwarbers on the roster, the real Mutos, right? Because you can't pay everybody top dollar. So it would be nice to have that infusion of talent for a lot of teams. So they're probably hesitant to trade some of the top prospects, but I still think they want to hang on to Painter. He's somebody they want. Starling Kaba, I just mentioned, shortstop prospect who's just number 100 on that list. He's only 18 years old. I think there's still some time to see what he can do. So, I think the Phillies would like to keep a lot of them, but you might not need to trade a lot of them to get some of these short-term rentals.
Frank Klose, everybody, our 97.3 ESPN.com Phillies Insider. He answers your Phillies questions each and every Tuesday here on the Sports Bash, and there's a look at some of the things that people are asking about. When you're out in front, you're looking for ways to improve, and when things go bad, you're wondering, what's wrong with this guy? Merrifield and Walker, those are 2 high-paid guys. Merrifield, $8 million. But I do think it was a smart signing. that hasn't worked out so far. A lot of baseball left for him. Castellanos, that thing, see how it materializes. And obviously the Walker thing, people looking, because they do have another option. Spencer Turnbull pitched pretty well in that spot. Frank, we'll talk to you next week, man.
Thanks, Mike.